Colonial Furniture Company uses a standard cost system. One of the company's most popular products is a cherry wood desk. The per unit standard costs of the desk, assuming a normal balance of 2,000 units per month, are as follows. Okay, so to make a normal volume of 2,000 units per month, these per unit standard costs are the following. Direct materials, 100 board feet of wood at $1.50 per foot. So that would be $150 per unit. Direct labor takes, on average, standard, 4 hours at $10 per hour. And then you have manufacturing overhead that's applied at $18 per unit as follows. Fixed costs, you've got $20,000 of fixed costs. You divide that into 2,000 units of normal production to come up with $10 fixed cost per unit. Variable cost is given at $8 per unit. So the total standard unit cost for producing 1 unit of this cherry wood desk is $208. All right, so it says during May, so we're dealing with 1 month here, 1,800 desks were scheduled and produced at the following unit costs. And so here we have direct materials, 105 feet at $140 per foot for $147 dollars per unit in direct materials for the 1,800 desks. Well, direct labor, 4.5 hours at $9 per hour for per unit cost of direct labor, for direct labor of $40.50. And then manufacturing overhead is $34,200 divided into 1,800 units, or $19 per unit. So total actual unit cost is $206.50. Note that the manufacturing overhead in that actual unit costs consists of both 20,000 fixed, and then the rest of that is variable. All right, so it says compute the following, in A, compute the following cost variances for the month of May. Materials price variance, materials quantity variance, labor rate variance, labor efficiency variance. So those are the 4 you see in front of you. And then I've got a separate page for overhead spending variance and volume variance. So we're skipping over B, and C says comment on any significant problems or areas of cost savings revealed by your computation of cost variances. Also comment on any possible causal relationships between significant favorable and unfavorable cost variances. Okay, so anyway, and here again, you need to figure out whether or not the variances are favorable or unfavorable, because you can't really comment on them if you haven't determined whether or not a variance is favorable or unfavorable, right? All right, so for the first 4, I've put the formulas out there for you. And so actual quantity used in our first, I'll bring that down a little bit. Is 1,800 units times the standard price well, actually take that back. Actual quantity is 1,800 units times 105 feet. And then you're going to multiply that times your standard price of $150 per foot minus your actual price of $140 per foot. Okay, so this part of the equation on the right hand side is pretty easy to figure out. It's 10 cents, right? This, just use your calculator and figure out that this number is 189,000 feet of materials actually used and so 189,000 feet actually used times the 10% variance in our standard price minus actual price is 18,900. Now, question is that 18,900 a favorable variance or unfavorable? Remember, this is the material price variance. Well, it's favorable because, and again, some of this you can almost eyeball, because the standard cost for the 100 board feet used in producing a unit of product is 150 per foot, and the actual price is 140. So this is going to be a favorable variance. Okay, moving on to number 2. And so here, your material quantity variance you're going to take your standard price of 150 per board feet of wood, and you're going to multiply that times your standard quantity, which is the 1,800 units, times the 100 board feet that it takes to produce a unit of product, minus, and there should be a times in there, the actual quantity, which is this number right here, I guess actually this should be in brackets. Okay, so you're going to multiply this times whatever the sum is of all this. So here it's 180,000 minus 189,000, and you're going to multiply, or excuse me, that's a negative 9,000. You're going to multiply that times the 150 per foot. And so that equals a negative 13,500. Okay? So basically, anytime you have a positive number, it's going to be favorable. Anytime you have a negative number, it's going to be unfavorable. All right, moving to the next one. The labor rate variance if you look at what they have here, standard is 4 hours to make 1 unit of this desk at $10 per hour, and what actually happened is 4.5 hours was taken per unit at $9 per hour. So is that positive or negative? Well, the sum of this is that it took more hours than standard, but it cost them less per hour, but the sum of all that per unit is 50 cents more actual versus standard. So let's just run the numbers. Actual hours is going to be 1,800 units times 4.5 per unit, and you're going to multiply that times the standard rate of 10 minus actual rate of 9, and so 1,800 times 4.5 is 8,100, and you're going to multiply that times $1, so you're going to come up with $8,100. It's a positive number, so this labor rate variance is a positive $8,100 favorable. Okay. Next, computation of the labor efficiency variance. So you're going to take your standard hourly rate of $10, and you're going to multiply that by standard hours, which is 1,800 units times 4 hours minus 1,800 units times the 4.5 hours it actually took. Killed that. And so what you come up with over here is $7,200 minus $8,100, so this is a negative 900, so you're going to take your $10 and multiply that. I didn't really do that very well, but that goes here, and you multiply the 10 times the $900. So what you come up with is a $9,000 negative number, so this is unfavorable. Okay? Well, that's 1 through 4, A1 through 4. So next we move to A5 through 6, and I'm doing that on a different sheet because it's kind of a different format. So I'll bring 5 down where you can see it good. And so here, in 5, we're computing the overhead spending variance, and in 6, we're computing the volume variance. All right, so I've kind of formatted it already. Computation of overhead spending variance, computation of volume variance. All right, so first we have to figure out the overhead per flexible budget for the 1,800 units we actually produced. And so we know that fixed costs are $20,000. The volume, or the variable costs, what we do is we take the 1,800 units that we actually produced, and you multiply that by the standard variable cost per unit of $8. And what you come up with is $14,400. So that's what it should have cost for overhead to produce 1,800 units. So we're going to transfer the sum of these two numbers over here, 34,400 and then from that you're going to subtract the actual overhead for the month. What is the actual overhead for the month? Well, it kind of tells you right there in the under the where it says during May 1,800 desks were scheduled and produced at the following actual unit cost. Well, it tells you that manufacturing overhead, actual manufacturing overhead, was 34,200, which consists of 20,000 of fixed and another 14,200 would be variable, correct? It's the only way you come up to 34,200. So they give you the number, but you have to know kind of what you're looking for. And so per budget, it should have been, your overhead cost should have been 34,400. Actual overhead for the month was 34,200. You subtract this from this, it's a positive number of $200. And so we know that that is a favorable outcome or number. Okay? Now moving to 6. This is real easy. We're computing the volume variance here. And so here's the formula. Overhead used using standard costs, that is 1,800 units times what? Well, it's the fixed cost per unit plus the variable cost per unit. And these are the standard costs. Well, fixed cost per unit, standard, is $10. Variable cost is $8. So total manufacturing overhead, standard manufacturing overhead, is $18 per unit. And so this number is 32,400. Now what's this saying? Well, this is saying that for 1,800 units, we should have spent $18 per unit in overhead costs. And that would cost you $32,400 applied to these 1,800 units of overhead. Okay, so you compare what it should have cost in overhead to produce these 1,800 units. Compare it with the actual overhead that you spent for the 1,800 units. Well, that number is right here. That's 34,400. So look, you spent $2,000 more in overhead costs to produce these 1,800 units. So this is a negative $2,000. What's it attributable to? Well, you know, this stays the same. So you spent $2,000 more in variable costs to produce these 1,800 units. So this is an unfavorable variance. All right, so that's it for A. Let's talk about C. And it appears that the company has problems in two areas. They have a pretty large unfavorable materials quantity variance of $13,500 that's unfavorable. And so what does this indicate? Well, they're using far more material than what is provided for in standard costs. Assuming that standard costs are reasonable, the quantity of materials being used is excessive. So, I mean, you might want to look at two things. Is this reasonable? And if so, it appears that, or ask yourself whether or not this is excessive, and 13,500 unfavorable seems to be pretty excessive. Second, the unfavorable labor efficiency variance indicates that more labor hours are being used than indicated by the standard number of hours. And so what might this indicate? Well, it might indicate low productivity or something like that. Now, might the two unfavorable variances, the MQV and the LEV, be tied to each other? Well, yeah. Again, if the purchasing department is purchasing inferior raw materials, then it might take them more materials to make the same amount of product, and it may take the workers longer to produce a favorable product. So there may be a tie there, that tie in there that management needs to check out. Now let's look at the favorable variances, and I'll put this back up so you can follow. The MPV may indicate that the purchasing department is doing an excellent job purchasing product below normal, but it might also indicate that they're buying discount material that's really shoddy in quality too. So something to look at considering the two unfavorables. Now the favorable LRV, labor rate variance, may indicate that the number of lower paid inexperienced workers used during the period was higher than normal. And so their inexperience may contribute to the fact that they're using more material to produce the same amount of product, and it's taking them longer. So, something to look at. Now, as far as back to this. 5 and 6. Really no comment on this. I mean, it pretty much explains itself. Their actual spending was $200 favorable, but what they should have produced is costing them $2,000 more. So anyway, that is your problem. Your answers to C may vary, so don't worry too much about that. But hopefully I gave you some leeway. As far as comments, really want you to concentrate on A, 1 through 4, not so much 5 and 6, but if you have some comments on those, that's fine too.